everyone. My name is Jackie Cooper. I'm with the Blockchain Legal Institute, and we want to welcome you to the stage because we have a very special panel today. The topic is Death is a Bitch and how to beat the Grim Reaper with your digital assets. So this is something that everyone who owns any digital asset needs to be thinking about, and I'm going to have my panel members introduce themselves first, and then we'll round back to me. So, Laura?
Hi, I'm LC, Laura Cole. I'm with Industrial Business Lawyers. We are a boutique blockchain law firm. We help developers, builders, startups, anyone in the space that's touching on blockchain. We do onshoring, offshoring, tokenomics, token memorandums if you want to get listed. We basically are a full-service firm for anyone in the distributed ledger technology space, and I'm happy to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Amber, how are you doing?
I am great. Thanks for having me on the panel. I'm Amber Welch. I am the co-founder and CEO of FinSuite. We are a full fractional services consulting, offering financial services, operational services, digital marketing services, fundraising, and product strategy. So we really cover the entire ecosystem of what startups in Web3 need. I've been in fintech for about 20 plus years and came to the area with both a comp sci degree and an accounting finance degree. And then most recently, we decided to launch a product called Navi AI. The idea being that we would be able to alleviate the idea that founders don't know what they don't know. Working really closely with the BLI, obviously, in order to ensure that the access to knowledge around risk, compliance, and regulation from a financial perspective is easily accessible at all stages.
And Matt.
Hello, happy to be here.
Yep.
Here at ETH Denver, definitely a pleasure. Happy to see people in the audience. Happy to be with these amazing panelists. And I'm also a builder, so we're here not only to talk about the issues, but also to build technology that addresses the issues. Jackie and I occasionally talk about what kind of applications would be needed for people in our industry that are, facing like the next chapter of life or life hereafter. And it's a subject that isn't talked about much. So we're happy to give it a voice here today.
So the Blockchain Legal Institute is a centralized library of resources. And one of the things that has been asked of us often is what happens with your digital assets. So that's why this panel is really, really important. So we are going to be, as I'm doing the various slides here, I might hand it over to my partner here. There we go. Nope, the other way.
Oh.
There we go. This is our panel overview. We are going to be looking at a variety of things in terms of understanding what digital assets are, the legal considerations. Do you have, is it outlined in your will? What about digital executors and what are they, who are they, and who should they be? Do you have a digital organizer and access and security? So, statistics. What do you guys know about digital assets, wills, who needs them? This is a multidisciplinary panel, and the reason why we're doing this is because from the finance side to the building side to the law side, there's a lot of members that need to be on your team. So from your own personal experiences with knowing your clients, what have you found that they need to know or should be aware of?
I think having a plan or a document addressing a lot of what happens if scenarios is the most important part, because when you're starting a company or when you build a project, in the beginning, everything's great, and then, friction happens. And when that friction happens, that's really when it's most important that you did the work early and have something in writing to address what happens when things aren't going as planned. My biggest thing right now, the clients that I work with the most right now are clients that are breaking up, and it's not pretty. And you've got to figure out who gets what tokens, who gets what early financing back, who gets the IP moving forward, who owns what assets, digital and physical sometimes. So having a document to address that early when things are going really well is so much easier than when you're calling me saying, help. Like, this is going so poorly.
Amber, I know that you're in the finance side. What have you found in terms of what your clients seem to need?
Well, I definitely back up everything that Elsie is saying. I think what a lot of people fail to realize is you need to be thinking about business continuity from day one. Nobody should be thinking detailed exit plan on day one, but it goes back to the old adage, you plan for the worst and you hope for the best. And it's not always a bad situation. We frequently see companies whose co-founders decide to exit and move to a new project for whatever reason, and new help, new CEOs, new C-suite are stepping into those roles, and that's where that knowledge becomes extra important.
For sure. I know, Matt, you're a builder, so what do you think the builders need to know from a digital asset will perspective?
I think one thing that's important to note about the builders is, especially through things like the Ethereum community, the builders have been enriched over the last, 5 years or more. As builders go to competitions, number one, they get investors, they get venture capital in. Traditionally, this has been in things like digital assets even. So a founder might raise money or resources or a treasury in something like Bitcoin. So number one, they're already dealing with something that's that's a little bit different. And number two, the builders are the ones that, like I said, may have already been enriched because they've been in the program for a while, they've been in the industry for a while, and they've received bounties and investment of different kinds. Maybe they've had exits, maybe they've successfully appropriated lots of tokens because they built a really great platform. So it probably affects builders as much as anyone. There may be as many builders, there's not as many builders, but there may be proportionally builders with a lot of assets, whereas a casual investor at this time, or in a bear market, or maybe even a casual investor might have bought something that's possibly worthless today. Whereas builders have been around for a while, probably have a lot of substantial assets of value that are marked high in a market. And those builders are also maybe distracted, or they're busy building, and they don't take the time to think about this. So I would just say, yeah, builders definitely take a look at overall what assets are around, and who do you want to hold those if something happens to you.
You bring up all of you bring up a really great point. So the stats that are here: 300 million people possibly own crypto, and over 4.9 billion are internet users. So all of those are digital assets. But I have a feeling that if we were to poll the audience, not that many individuals within the audience might actually have wills. And if you are in the process of either purchasing a digital asset or creating a digital asset, and your families don't know how to access those digital assets or what you're creating, then what you're doing is going to stay on chain and won't benefit those that you actually want to have benefit. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is just a sample of the digital assets that any of us could have, that we need to have considered in our will. And for me, I know I'm a writer, so I have to think about ebook. I know that we all have social media content. There are databases. But how many of us in our wills actually take into account the airdrops that we get, or the NFTs, or the domain names? I can't tell you how many I own. So what about for all of you guys? Is there anything here that you think needs to really stand out when you are creating a will or need to put some information into that digital asset organizer that we're going to talk about later?
Yeah, I mean, we have to think about digital assets as more than just crypto, because there's IP out there that covers more than just what's on chain. And so in this information digital age of the internet, where you're only spending more and more time on the internet, you really need to think about how it is you're engaging, what you're engaging in, what you actually own of that, and do an assessment, find a way to document what you can, and address it accordingly. Because if something happens to you, there might be real value in stuff that you've created or stuff that you own or engaged with. Maybe you're in a DAO and you want, the DAO has rules on how that transfers if you pass away, or maybe your DAO doesn't even address that. There might be, a lot of open questions in terms of digital assets that you need to take the time to assess what you actually have, and is it what you think you have? Because sometimes You might own an NFT and you don't own what you think you own about it. Or you might be putting content out on a certain social media and it's not actually yours because you're using a website that has terms and service that take it from you the moment you publish it. So you need to think about what it is you're doing, how you're engaging with it, and what's actually written or documented on their website, and then what you would like to have happen as well.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share out? Otherwise, we're going to go right to the next slide. We have a lot of information to share.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So, Amber, I know that you are dealing with multiple jurisdictions because the clients that you serve are not just here in the United States. So what would you like to share with everyone about how to work cross borders and what to be aware of?
So this is a really important topic that's frequently overlooked, and I know I keep saying that, but it's a common theme with founders and companies to prioritize product over some of the foundational pieces of creation, and they get themselves into trouble. So first recommendation is always seek out knowledgeable people. What you're gonna find 9 times out of 10 is there are a lot of players, more and more every day, coming into the space saying they understand what all of us are doing, those of us who are building, who have experience and have been around for a long time, and they don't. And the unique aspect of these different jurisdictions is that you have to understand the underlying emerging technology to a certain extent to be able to know what kind of questions to ask of those service providers. And then the other piece that I've seen frequently, especially in the finance realm, is very few finance providers understand the idea of business continuity. They don't understand not only the cross-jurisdictional piece, but they definitely don't understand the different components that go into estate planning, because it is more than wills. There are trusts and different types of trust, especially in the digital asset component. Mm-hmm. So being able to actually know that the people you're talking to are properly vetted, and then can initially review your situation to provide you a course forward and not just say, hey, sign this contract and pay me money, is my biggest typical piece of advice that I give to anybody I speak with.
Yeah, I agree with you.
The next slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, first of all, a show of hands, how many of you actually have wills? Awesome. But those that don't have wills, now raise your hand. It's about 50-50. So when you do have a will, you still have to look at these parts. You have to really, and this is difficult, explicitly write down every digital asset you own. You really have to do a brain drop. And you have to specify, how do you want this to be handled? Because I've had many conversations with individuals about whether the asset should be held or liquefied. And if you're not around and you don't give those details or those instructions in the will, then your executor or your family, who might not know anything about these assets, they might say, well, let's just sell it. And it might not be the best time to sell. So the other thing that we mentioned is how to access that, and we're going to be talking about that, as well as what should be done. So I know that, Matt, Amber, and Laura, there are a lot of different pieces to this. What do you think is the most important of this laundry list that we have here?
I think addressing the fact that you do have digital assets is the most important. I mean, who handles it and who's keeping track of it, or who's got the power to the keys? Your attorney who writes your will might not want to be the keeper of the keys. I know a lot of wills, trust, and estates attorneys that seek out my help. They don't want to be the custodian. They don't want that burden, that stress of trying to maintain that. So now you need a document that says what you have, and then you need a separate document or ability to get to that, because you don't want to have them necessarily in the same document, depending on who the fiduciary of your estate is.
That's very true. Matt, what do you think for this laundry list? Because I know you own a number of digital assets. Where do you think, what's important here?
I think people should evaluate, like, where on your priority list of things to do is this? Okay, so you can rank it on a scale of 1 to 10. I'm pretty busy today. Have I updated my digital asset, repository and database? No, probably haven't. But where, first of all, be thinking to yourself, how high a priority is this for you? If you have, children and heirs, it's probably fair, and a significant amount of crypto, it's probably fairly high on your priority list. And then if it is high on your priority list, then you want to start like chiseling away at how you're going to address it, right? And really, what are all those digital assets? Because previously they might have been called things like intangibles, right? A bunch of things that were unknown, or some value in a name, or some goodwill. The value of the goodwill or entitlements, that can all, like, there may be a lot of future, we all already know this, there's a lot of future benefits sometimes to participating in these networks. So your wallet may have received a certain amount of benefits, and be it from an airdrop or some other way you participated in something, and maybe there's a future benefit or entitlement. Those things would be thought through as well. But yeah, I think it's how high do you prioritize it maybe first, and then what does it really look like, Jackie? What should let's say someone's just all of a sudden the light's gone off, the $20 million worth of Bitcoin that they have is on a hard drive, and they kept the passphrase somewhere else, and they're thinking like, well, who do I need to give this to? Who's going to be the executor or the trustee? Or what if I don't have someone like that in mind right now? Where do I start? So I just want to ask you that question. And maybe that's another slide, but let's say the light's gone off here and someone wants to take action today. What would you tell them to do?
I would say secure your coins. Make sure that you have it offline and online. And if you're going to have a paper copy of it, put it in a security box, because sometimes the online gets lost and you still need to have the paper access.
But if I'm going to share this with someone, okay, I shouldn't email them these things.
No.
And who should I share it with? A parent?
Well, that's going to be part of the decisions that we're going to talk about.
Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's go on to the next slide.
Okay.
Let's be honest, we're all hoping that someone's sharing 20 million in Bitcoin with each of us.
Yeah, that sounds good.
But I've also heard stories of those computers being thrown away because parents didn't know that the wallets were on them. So there is that, why we have to share with our parents or family the importance of keeping digital tools that might have digital assets on them. So digital executor team, just like you have more than one doctor, that might be a specialist, you might have to have more than one attorney, or you might have to have a multidisciplinary team, because your attorney might not understand digital assets. They might be a legacy attorney and might be really great, but they might, or your CPA, but they might have no clue what to do if you have to access a wallet. So, with this laundry list, family, attorney, CPA, banker, website, how do you make a decision as to who should actually be part of this process, and what do you tell them? What are your thoughts about that, Laura?
I think that's a really personal question, depending on what your network looks like. But anytime, you're hiring someone to do their job, you're probably a little bit safer than, the friction that can happen with different interpersonal relationships. So just ensure that, you're comfortable with who you're working with. You have to trust who you're working with. This is your future. This is your family's legacy, basically. So whoever you work with, you want to feel comfortable with, you want to be able to trust. You want to be able to, have a price point that makes sense for you and your assets and your future. And you want to ensure that that relationship has a fiduciary element to it, so they have a duty to you to ensure that they, do right by you, and they, handle their matter with respect and in accordance with your wishes.
Amber?
I actually was going to mention the fiduciary piece myself, so I'm glad you brought that up. Also, for people who don't maybe have the funding, right? Maybe all of these components don't apply to you because you are bootstrapping or you're an individual. There's always a poor man's option. I know, like, when COVID hit and I was just starting out with my company and this seed of an idea, and I started freaking out because I was like, wow, this is really scary. Didn't think I would live through this in my lifetime. I created a video. Now, I didn't give away seed phrases and things that could come back to bite me, but I did express my ideas of what I wanted to occur with my estate. We do have trusts for our assets because we have both physical and digital in our household. And sometimes having something is better than having nothing. So kind of going back off of what you said about prioritizing, I think if you sit there and you look at your laundry list of to-dos, and maybe it doesn't include the ability or the financial means to cover all of these bases, even taking some of the small steps to say, I'm going to record a video and at least express my wishes surrounding them is a good place to start. And then further saying, hey, I'm going to set up 10 or 15 minutes each day where I just tackle a couple of items on that list and add to it. And eventually you'll have it complete, and then it's just a matter of like rechecking it, which is much faster.
I agree. I also know that in April or March, we might be preparing our taxes. And that's a really good time when you're looking back over the course of the last year to tackle some of the data accumulation that you need for your digital assets, because you're already looking back at what you're doing. And so this is a time when it actually might be a little bit easier for you to take the mental space to actually write down certain things, so that way the next year is a little bit easier for you or your family. Next slide.
I had a good
yeah.
thought here, though. I had a
Yeah.
good thought. Okay, so it seems a little overwhelming.
It
Seems
is.
like a lot of homework.
It is.
And then the other thought I had is that so much of this is intertwined in business, or with your startup friends, or with your business partners, and so much of the eventual outcomes, disputes, if this then that, or even something happens to them that affects you. It just made me think how of that team, I think the company should make it a priority, right? As in,
Yeah.
it's a company priority. Okay, so it seems overwhelming, right? The CPA, the attorney. Also, when we're talking about it, to me, this is what I wanted to break it out into two things. Okay, so who am I going to have really sorted out for me? Mostly me. Okay, I'm going to have to list the assets, right? Just like when you go to trial or you get in trouble, you know your story better than everyone else. Your lawyer can't even help you unless you got your story straight and the facts. This is very hard. So I just want to mention that. Like, I looked at that slide about that team, and it looks like an overwhelming meeting. It's like a long meeting, but the most important thing is maybe to prep yourself, right? So break it into some small steps here. Make a list. You probably already have a list. There's even books. There's small booklets specifically for these purposes. They give them out in conferences sometimes. And of course, that might need to be in a safe. Maybe it's done with your own sort of cipher, and you've just made little annotated notes around what wallet was what, and you are the only one that knows what it is at that time, so you don't feel like you're putting a bunch of information out there in the world in a single place that has so much effect on your life, right? So there's these little ways I guess you could deal with it yourself first, and then the other side of it I thought was the accountant is probably a fairly important person in this story, and then where I started this point was how important probably the company or the organization that maybe made these assets or owes you more assets or has committed something, or you have entitlements in that organization. The lawyer, very important it sounds like, as I'm evaluating this team, right? So one, I have to take the first steps. Number two, the accountant should definitely be aware of a lot of things. Family should be aware of a lot of things. But a lot of the bigger ones, right, the messier ones, you would want some professional help. I guess that was what I wanted to say.
No, I think that's important. The other thing that I know, as this space evolves, the type of assets are changing too. So now we have staking. There's a lot of other things that maybe people weren't involved in a few years ago. So it's really important as you are creating your list of assets to also think of the flow chart. Okay, so this is the asset. This is what I'm doing with it. What do I want my person who I'm going to be sharing this with to do with it or not do with it? So the reason why I have this book up here, and even though this book that I created for my daughter, and if you do go to Blockchain Legal Institute, I'll send this to you for free. But I created this, and this is probably out of date now, because I created this with just Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in mind. But I'm doing so much more now. So I need to update this, because this is simply a crypto wallet organizer that's very easy for her to access, because I have wallets on my phone, wallets on the computer, it's double authenticator, there's this, there's that. She would have no way to know how to access any of the things that I've been growing for her. So these are things that, as we in the community, if we're creating something, these are tools that all of us need. And so that's why, as you create something, share it out. So again, this 5-minute wallet organizer, it'll be free to all of you, but I'm going to have to update it. So do you guys know of any other wallet organizers that might be out there that are also tools? Because I created this because I realized there wasn't one that I saw.
No, I
No.
mean, I think that's the only one I've seen.
Yeah, so, but again, if you guys hear of any, let us know. We'll list it on the library. Let's go to the next slide. So access and security, really important. When your will becomes public, it becomes public. Don't put your seed words or any of your information in there. So again, from your knowledge of working in the legal area as well as in the finance area and just in the building area, who would you want to have access to this information, and how would you recommend for people to handle this very important step?
Well, if you can, I would say find a lawyer who's willing to hold to be the custodian, but that'll maybe cost more. So then your secondary approach would be to maybe get a safe deposit box or a safe where your will references the safe, and then the access to it is somewhere else. You kind of create like a treasure hunt basically, because you don't want all of it in any one spot, especially because a will becomes public when you've got to announce who gets what. So you want to be very careful about navigating someone to what they need to know, where it is, and that can be kind of tricky. But that's something you can work with your lawyer on, or there's creative solutions out there too. And the legal lift doesn't have to be so scary. It's not like you got to spend days or weeks or months figuring this out. The legal lift can be swift, it can be efficient and less costly than you think, because anything is better than nothing at this point. It's just so important to address these things as they come up now when you can, versus at a later point when maybe you can't access your seed phrase, or you forgot where it's at, or you had an accident and no one can find out where this information is. So it's better to address what you can today, how you can, and then touch base maybe annually as your financial position changes or your assets change and you need to touch back in. But it's better to do what you can when you can, and the legal lift is never as scary or as costly as you think.
I want to add to that, medical power of attorney. If it's not just, if you pass away, if you become incapacitated, if something happens to you and you need access to these resources to help fund your medical care, that's another reason why this is really important to make sure you include your family in the conversation of where this information is. Even if they don't have full access to it, they need to know so that way they can support you in case you have a need. Next slide. All right, Amber, what about service provider policies? I know I don't always read my service provider policies even though I'm an attorney. I click yes. How many of these policies do you happen to read to know what the terms and conditions are in case something happens to you and where those assets go?
The number of times I've had a conversation with staff or senior staff that are just starting out in finance for their faces to go dead white when they realize that no, they're not lawyers, but yes, they need to be able to read through the legalese and understand those terms. I would have a lot of money if I put money on all of those situations. It is important, yes. If you're not a lawyer, and I know I'm kind of surrounded by them now, save for you, that it can be overwhelming to sit there and see a 100-page document. But the piece of advice I give is at least learn to understand the basic terms of that. How long do things last? What are the definitions associated with it? And your teams that are supporting your company or you as an individual, they need to be able to read and understand those provider policies. And that is so important.
I'm going to hop in here because of a conversation that I've had this week with some others. NFTs and OpenSea, royalties. So, when you create something, you have certain expectations, and then companies change those expectations and the terms and conditions. So it's really important that as you create digital assets, that you also keep up with whatever the terms and conditions are, because that might impact what you're going to be giving to your heirs. And if you don't know where the changes are, then you also can't direct that in your will. So next slide. Matt, there is a list of various buckets here. There's the personal bucket, the financial bucket, the business bucket. What do you think, where do you think people should kind of attack first in terms of putting information down for their digital asset organizers and just in general?
I like what was said earlier, that you have to start somewhere and something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we definitely want to use this opportunity to not overwhelm people. Okay, so I like this. What's next, right? Next steps. A lot of this is personal for people. People are very, you care about your Buffy corn. I know Jackie likes her Buffy corn, and
Very much so.
It's
Thank
personal. People care about their punk and their Bored Ape or whatever else it may be. I don't want to talk about those projects necessarily, but I think that this something is better than nothing, for sure. And the getting started is going to be important. I would say take it personally, number one, and then definitely consider your business. And going back to this third-party policies, something that a lot of people were probably affected by, is exchanges or other custodians, for lack of a better word, that have become insolvent or are going through some restructuring or have been, let's say everything's been completely appropriated into boxes that you never knew existed by this custodian, and you're getting back 10%, or your heirs are getting back 10% of what you and your financial team may have thought was appropriate or thought was the situation in writing. So Celsius is definitely one of those that's happened recently. I'm sure there's efforts to recover funds from a variety of the exchanges going all the way back to Mt. Gox. So I think there's a very valid point there about even what you think you may own, you may not, as it relates to those policies. And then I wanted to mention, with the getting started, get started. Number two, look for a good resource. Look for something structured. Look for something like what Jackie maybe has been presenting, or some of the work that we may be doing with the Standards Institute, where we're standardizing some of these things so everyone understands what it is, what it means. I think that those are going to be the next steps. I think there'll be more clarity. But going back to these buckets, I guess I just want to mention, go ahead and make it personal. And then as it relates to your company, maybe shift the burden onto the company operations people and see if they can help sort it out.
So Matt brings up a really good point. If you don't tell your family where your assets are and something does happen to you, then they also don't know what company to go to claim those assets. So that is another reason why, whether it's a centralized exchange or a decentralized exchange, your family needs to know where your assets are.
I think further to, it's important that as a builder, if you're the one in charge of code or you're building something for someone else, you need to have a contingency plan for if something happens to you, what happens to that client's code. If they can't access it anymore, I had a situation early on in my blockchain career where an NFT project was launched and the developer passed away, and that the owner of that NFT collection didn't have access to the wallet because of how the launch was connected to that wallet, and it was her whole livelihood. I mean, she went all in on this NFT project, so losing that overnight was terrifying for her, and it took months of tracking down his family members and getting to his personal computer and paying this professional company to kind of go through and unlock things for her. Whereas if they just had set a plan in their original agreement to say, here's in your agreement with your client, maybe here's a backup password to your GitHub repository, or this set of code that you might need to unlock this project should something happen. So you want to think about that in the early stages when you're just accepting a project or you're hiring someone to do something for you, you need to think about your access to that code or your access to that repository or whatever it is they're building. You need to have a back door to it because that's kind of what you're paying for too.
Yeah, very much so. Amber?
Yeah, I did have something to add. I knew you could see it in my eyes. So a couple of things, kind of building off of what both of you said. Low-hanging fruit is a key piece here. Tackle it by getting the easiest stuff out of the way first, and the things with the highest dollar value, the things that are going to have the greatest impact, tackle those first. The other piece on shared access is vitally important. I work with clients all the time in showing them the importance of shared drives, shared information, because the second their CFO goes on maternity leave and suddenly all of the financials are inaccessible because if they had no clue it was all on her personal devices, it's a story, right? And the same thing applies to digital assets and any assets for that matter. So tackle the low-hanging fruit and the high dollar values first. You're going to get the most bang for your buck there.
I know all this takes time, but if you can do it right from the start, then it'll be a little bit easier than having to backtrack. I know the pain right now of starting a CRM with all 9 years worth of contacts. It's a lot easier to start it from day one. So in terms of like your digital asset, if you buy a new digital asset, write it down. So just start with the new and then work backwards. Good. Okay, so 80-20, we often hear this. 80% of the people, myself included, don't do things. We procrastinate. 20% actually get on top. That's why I put the stat here. So how often do you think your digital asset platforms get updated, and how often do you think that you actually write down those updates, whether it's your passwords or things like that? Anyone?
I'll start with this one. So I see clients update terms and conditions on their marketplaces that they're running, on various different products that they run regularly. And most likely, a lot of us are actively participating in things. So I advise both my clients and the individuals I know, you should be reviewing that anytime there's a material change or on a quarterly basis for any maybe slightly less material changes and updating things.
Yeah. Anything?
Yep, I covered it.
Let's keep going. All right, next slide. All right, so this sort of goes back to how do we create a will? So who's in your family? Who do you want to have benefit? Maybe no one, maybe a charity. And then what are the assets that you're actually looking at? Are they online? Are they in real life? You know, and then do you have a trust? Is it in your safe box or is it on your phone, the assets? Because again, I have a lot of wallets on my phone that are not on my computer. And then depending upon your age, you might think that you actually don't need a will. But if you're under 17 and you're investing in digital assets or gaming or Bitcoin or anything like that, you need a will. You need, your parents need access to that information in case something was to happen. Obviously older, we all have different life passages and there's going to be different needs. And then where is this information? Is it physical or is it online? What other that's all right. What other things would you like to add for that?
No, I think that
Covers it?
Yeah.
Okay. Next slide. Okay, so again, who's your executor? We talked about this a little bit, but it goes back to the 5 W's. So who would like to talk about how do we decide who should be our executor for our digital assets?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, your digital asset executor might be different than your will executor. Mm-hmm. So those might not be shared, or they could be shared, but that's something that you need to decide. And I suggest you ensure that whoever you pick has a fiduciary duty to both.
The other thing is, let's say that you ask a friend to be your digital executor. You can have a contract with them. So, and you can also do multi-sig. There are a lot of different ways that you can protect the information. Amber, what other ideas do you have for digital executors?
So I think like in this space, we all talk about education a lot, right? Like we talk about how is adoption going to occur because that looks different all over the globe. And some places we've already seen it actively occurring just because of need exists there, like in certain South American and other third world countries. And then other more developed regions, we're talking about how adoption is going to be feasible because of Web 2, right? Like, so my mom's a boomer. She is going to adopt Web 3 when it doesn't seem like Web 3. Not that she hasn't had a lot of conversations already. But in the same way, it all starts with education. So the very first thing that I usually recommend to people is understand the basics. Most people don't start to think about these things when they're younger, and they should. Not only does life just happen, like my father passed away extremely young, and in my 20s, I was helping my mom sort through not only all the medical bills of dealing with someone who had a terminal illness, but then also, what do you do with that? Because they thought they had decades still ahead of them. So just start to understand the basics. Understand, what is a will? What is a trust? There are multiple types of trusts and what goes into them, who oversees them, what's a fiduciary. Basic terminology that's easy and accessible. And when you start to understand the basic education, it will be much less scary tackling the other components.
Yeah. Matt, I know you and I have talked about creative solutions in other parts of the world. And in the UAE, actually, we just learned about a new creative solution. Do you want to share what some of the court systems are doing there?
Sure, although I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
There's a lot of progressive ideas, I guess, that come out of the UAE and some of those regions that are, they have autonomy. They have the ability to kind of do things by an initiative that maybe comes from like someone in the country that's a prince or someone with a certain amount of power and authority in that system. So as I understand it, the International Financial Center is a particular jurisdiction. It's also I guess it's a number of buildings. I think it's also I don't know, maybe it's some kind of corporation of some kind, but most specifically it has its own courts. Right, so that was pretty interesting, something we learned recently. So the International Financial Center in Dubai has different statutes than maybe the rest of the country, and maybe even businesses outside of that jurisdiction. One of the things that we learned was that there's some innovation in the court system, and specifically around these, around this issue of succession, where while wills and things like inheritance maybe aren't applicable to a lot of people in that region due to their religion or their practices, certain of them need this kind of solution. So in that jurisdiction, the court, along with some entrepreneurs, I think, created a solution where the court itself could actually touch wallets and administer activities or have oversight of this very significant, and legal transaction, and appropriating the resources after someone's passed. So that I think is a pretty interesting story that more people are obviously going to discuss. Right? There's a lot of like autonomy. Like I said, they can move fast, maybe in that region. Whereas in the United States, maybe these things get deliberated for years, and the courts never have access to a wallet or hold a key or have anything of anything of consequence, right? Whereas it seems in some of these other jurisdictions they're actually maybe hands-on, which is interesting. So it's innovative, probably solves some problems for people like us or people that are affected by these conversations, but also may create problems.
That's true. So what we also learned is that within the building of the wallets and the infrastructure, that when someone did pass, then the information was triggered, and which led to the release of the digital assets to the heirs. So again, different jurisdictions and areas are looking at solutions, so that way someone who's in a fiduciary duty position actually has partial control and knowledge, but not all the information, so that way the heirs actually can benefit. All right, so we already touched on this. Approximately 60 to 70% of Americans are without a will. And in the UK, it's estimated that 50% of adults do not have a will. So for anyone who's listening or watching any of this, if you don't have a will, start, write it down. It doesn't have to be very complicated, but it take the first step. All right, taxes and death. We always hear that those are the two things that can always happen. Thoughts on how do we address the tax side of death and the digital asset side of this, the will. Because again, when you have digital assets, you have to account for them. And so, that's changing a lot. What are your thoughts about that?
So one of the things that I get is kind of the devil's advocate argument a lot when I talk to people about this specific thing is, well, I don't have enough to worry about a will, or they know what to do with it, or I've made sure the right people understand the process. But what they may not consider is there are legal proceedings that you guys can speak to far better than I can, I'm sure. There are steps and things that have to happen that can be greatly expedited by accounting for it with a little bit more effort while you're alive. Nobody wants to deal with probate. It is a long, drawn-out, very costly process that will take a good portion of what you leave behind away from the people you intend it for. So again, in my mind, it always goes back to education. In the US, we overcomplicate things, as we typically do, especially around taxes. So understand the basics, surround yourself with people who understand the details that you can trust, and put contracts in place for everything to protect yourself.
So we were talking prior to coming down here as to what happens when you do pass and you have to pay certain expenses from an estate. And we were talking about the importance of us as the person who's writing the will to say, what asset do we want to have sold first? Do you want to share some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if you don't quite address it, someone might clean out your Bitcoin account for your heirs because there's debts that need to be covered, and maybe you had quicker, better assets that weren't as long-term durational as you anticipated Bitcoin being, that you would want sold first. But they're wanting to, make it easier on themselves, or for whatever reason, they just want to pass that hot potato on. So they're like, let's just get rid of this and then use those funds. But now that's like a way larger taxable event for them. It costs them more, and it costs them in the long term if they see Bitcoin as like a long-term asset. Whereas you can maybe sell a quicker asset or renegotiate your debts to where you pay them down over time. Or there's so many mechanisms you can do that you would want to address that to where you're not just selling off the Bitcoin and creating that taxable event and then kind of double paying on it because now you're using it to pay off debt that didn't really need to be paid off in that way. So it's definitely something you want to address in the forefront because there's a lot of value over time in that, and you don't want to just get it burned because people don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, so I would also add, when you're creating a digital asset organizer for yourself, categorize your digital assets. So you might have NFTs, you might have airdrops, you might have cryptocurrency, you might have different types of digital assets. Make that list, but also make a decision. Is this something that you want to have held onto? Is this something that you might want to have appraised and assessed to maybe be sold first? You're the one that knows these assets. If you're staking, or if you have any other wallets that you're creating, someone in your family is not going to have a clue as to the value of that. And your attorney might not have a clue as to the value. Your accountant will know if you've told your accountant because they're going to know the cost basis. But still, that doesn't mean that you're going to want to sell that asset right away. So, Matt, from your perspective, again, of being in this space, how would you categorize assets in terms of where people might be thinking about both selling, holding, or that type of thing? If they're creating a will, I know it's a...
Yeah, valuing your assets, right?
Yeah.
I think knowing the upside, right, or knowing like there's things like you said, staking, right? There may be assets that you consider to be like a better long-term hold, and you may want to articulate that. There's definitely could be, assets that, like you said, you want to liquidate first. But there are also maybe things that have already sort of like expired in value, right? So you're going to understand those things probably if you're the investor more than anyone, right? And articulating that probably is very important because some things may have some wallets may have longer term value. You never know. This industry is also still very new. Airdrops are still very new. Formative ideas and where we might go, I think no one really knows. As it relates to like policy and regulation, even less clarity there. But you as the investor, you probably know why you invested. You may have your own horizon. Articulating that might be important.
I want to add something too, if that's
I
okay.
was going to add, yes, I actually have a question for you. It's not just on the business side. Because again, when you have a business and you're investing in different digital assets, you also might have assets that are in different countries. So that adds a whole nother layer of both access to those assets, as well as decisions within the business as how do you liquidate those assets or do you hold them, and then the insurance policies and everything else.
Don't sleep on a trust. That is something that I think a lot of people are intimidated by the idea of. They don't quite understand, or the misconception is trusts are for really rich people, right? It's for the 1%ers. And that is actually the complete opposite of accurate. Trusts are a fundamental part of passing on wealth, no matter what that quantity of wealth is. All of your physical assets should exist in a trust. My husband and I own farms in the Midwest where we were raised. We own a house and other tangible assets. Those exist in a trust. That trust dictates what happens to those assets when we're gone, and it protects them. So our children can't just sell them. We've all heard stories of like a sibling that just like gets rid of and loses their inheritance. It helps protect against that. There's also digital protective trusts for digital assets. And those kinds of trusts are really important because you can specify how you want set assets handled, whether it's a series of domains or a bunch of cryptocurrency. And so don't sleep on trusts, and also ensure that you understand the application of what should happen to those different types of assets based on where they're located.
Yeah, great point. Now, I know that individuals who might be listening might have thought that we would be really very specific in our conversation today, but we have to be broad and general because we can't give legal advice. So we're giving you the big picture. And again, everyone who's sitting up here can definitely assist with the details, but we need you to think about how do you organize everything, because that still falls on the individual's shoulders when you ask a professional to help you. Next slide. So these are just some examples. Full disclaimer, haven't vetted them, but these are just some examples of online resources for possible solutions for where you can go to have your wills or your digital assets held, or possibly a will created. But again, I haven't looked at all of that, so that is the disclaimer there. Yeah. So again, follow us on social media. We're here to help you, and we're here to answer your questions as they develop, because sometimes we don't know the questions until we have the issue. And then we realize that we need an answer, and that's when we reach out. So go to the next slide. And again, we are here to provide free resources, so definitely reach out to us. Do you have any questions? We have about 6 minutes, and we are open to questions. Oh,
Well, let's
Matt.
also just get, because there is only 6 minutes left, let's get final remarks, I guess,
Yeah,
from anyone
sure.
here in questions. Yeah.
Great idea.
Yeah. Y'all
All
go
right.
ahead, though.
Why don't you go first since you kicked it off?
Oh, okay.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, okay, easy for me. My final remarks are definitely a big thank you to the panelists.
Very much so. Thank you
Big
for
thank
being
you
here.
to Jackie, to this production crew.
Yes.
To all the amazing sponsors and mentors, people like Sans and Stefan, and all the founders of ETH Denver.
Very
I'd like
much
to
so.
definitely do a shout out to them. And then, to everyone that, comes out and supports building. The sponsors, anyone that supported a bounty, big thanks. I'll introduce you to Jackie, and she'll give you a private tutoring session in exchange for being such a great sponsor of this conference. I'll yield the rest of my time here.
Okay, Amber.
So probably final thoughts from me are, don't be afraid to reach out to the people around you. One of the greatest assets about the Web3 ecosystem is that it is one of the most community-driven experiences I've ever had in the time that I've existed. And early on, I found that I rarely, if ever, had anybody say they wouldn't be willing to offer me some kind of knowledge or help or introduction. So, I mean, like, from me to anybody listening, feel free to reach out. I absolutely thrive on helping make those connections. And offer advice and assistance where I can and point you in the direction of people who know more than me where I can't.
She's definitely, her nickname is the Cupid of networking, so very much so.
I echo everything they just said. Thank you so much, ETH Denver, and all the sponsors here, and for this great panel that BLI helped put together. And I also think Web3 has just been the most rewarding space in teaching community and support. Its ethos is wildly helpful for anyone who's willing to learn. So really leverage that. And also, the legal lift just doesn't have to be scary. Talking to an attorney does not have to be scary. You should be able to build thoughtfully. And that's really what I encourage all of my clients to do. There's not a lot you can't do in this space, but you have to do it thoughtfully if you don't want to get in trouble, if you don't want to lose your assets, if you don't want to make mistakes or forget about these big things like wills. So talking to an attorney early is not as scary as you think. And I always do like a 30-minute intro call just to touch base with you to see if I can even help you without a charge. And I don't know a lot of attorneys that do charge for that initial phone call. So please reach out to an attorney if you're building something. If you win a bounty here and you want to build and make an MVP from that project with the funding you won, create a founder's agreement. Just reach out to an attorney and work with them and get started in a thoughtful way, because it'll just help you so much down the line.
Very much so. And I know I've been in the space for only 9 years. A lot of you have been in the space a lot longer. And every year I'm learning something new, and every year I'm adding another digital asset to my collection, because I'm a Bitcoin miner, I'm a node owner. These are all things that I'm learning about, and I know that I need for my daughter to be able to have her understand, because again, these are things that I'm having a lot of fun with, but eventually it's going to benefit her. So, if you have someone in your family that you want to have a benefit, we have a responsibility now to take that initiative. We are in a decentralized space. We need to tell more individuals within our space, just take a few moments, write down what your digital assets are, give the directions that you need. It's not that difficult. Even if it's not complete in terms of your thoughts, you're at least putting something on paper, so that way you take ownership of what it is that you're creating. Because if you don't take ownership of what you created and say what you want, then the state will decide for you. And I know that all of us in this space would like to make our own decisions. So let's do it, Anyway, we appreciate everyone who's here. I did see that there was a question or two in the audience.
Yeah, questions.
Yeah, questions?
Any? Oh, excellent. We got a mic in the stands.
With 2FA and the identity and fingerprint what a mess. Are we have to cut off people's fingers when they pass or something?
I'm glad you asked the question, and I'm going to tell this story. I have a dear friend, who wanted to give $10,000 of Bitcoin to his granddaughter. And so I said, great. I asked, where's your wallet? And he told me. It wasn't one that I knew, but it was fine. But it was one that he accessed on his phone. So I said, okay, how are you accessing your phone? He said, with my face. I said, get it off. I said, how is your granddaughter going to access your phone when you're not around with your face? So he changed it to numbers, so that way she then had the code, or the parent had the code. And that way, you're right, with the double authentication, with the facial ID, with everything else like that, we think of it as security, but it's actually a barrier. And I think one of you actually was telling me another story of a challenge with the fingerprint and the facial ID as well. So again, that's my unsolicited legal advice. Don't use it on your phones. I don't know if anyone else has
There's
comment.
pretty cool tools available.
Yeah.
One of the ones you had listed, Webacy, they actually have something called a panic button that you can set up as an escape plan. So what happens to your stuff if you need an emergency exit from whatever that may be? So there are ways to go about doing that. You just have to again, goes back to what you said, you got to be thoughtful.
Yeah. And you also have to think about who do you want to have access to this information.
There's 20 seconds left. everybody just take a deep breath for yourself, you know? Enjoy your time here. You made it here. Maybe you traveled from a long way. You have your own goals. Thank you for listening to
Yeah.
our talk.
Go
And
build great things.
Build
Yeah.
great things and share it with everyone that you know, because we're all here today, and we appreciate each one of you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.